In the beginning, God spoke, and light shattered the darkness. Life was formed from dust, and humanity was created for communion, not distance. But freedom was broken by rebellion. A garden became an exile. Yet even there, God promised that the story would not end in loss. Through a flood, God preserved life. Through Abraham, God promised blessing to all nations. Through slavery and the sea, God made a way where there was none. From stone tablets to wandering hearts, the law revealed the problem it could not fix. Kings rose and fell. Prophets cried out for justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Sacrifices were offered again and again, temporary coverings for a permanent wound. Then, in the fullness of time, God stepped into the story himself, not with a crown of gold, but with humility, compassion, and truth. Jesus healed the sick, welcomed the outcast, and proclaimed a kingdom unlike any other. He carried our sin to a cross where love absorbed violence and mercy met judgment. They sealed him in a tomb. They buried hope. They hid grace behind a stone. But on the third day, that stone was rolled away. Sin and death defeated. Love and grace victorious. The promise fulfilled. The resurrection was not a surprise ending. It was the plan all along. From creation to covenant, from sacrifice to salvation, every page was pointing here. This is Easter, the moment when death lost its grip and life, true life, rose again victorious.
Well, happy Easter, McLean Church. Christ is risen. Christ has risen indeed. Today, I'd like us to think about the resurrection in perhaps somewhat different ways than we typically think about it. Most of us were taught and exposed to a very classic way of thinking about Jesus' death and resurrection, following an understanding of the cross made prominent by the reformers of the 16th century. Most of us were taught that Jesus' death was a transaction by which the penalty for humanity's sin was paid. God showed his approval or acceptance of this payment by raising Jesus from the dead. Now, this understanding of the death and resurrection of Jesus is found throughout the New Testament, and it is a central part of understanding what Jesus' death and resurrection accomplish. But there's more embodied in the death and resurrection of Jesus than just a transaction that secures our salvation. In Jesus' death and resurrection, we are also given a paradigm by which we can understand the reality of life. And most significantly for today's talk, we are given hope for a brighter future. To understand how this works, we need to begin with Good Friday. We've often remarked that it's interesting that we call Good Friday good. One of the interesting things to me about Good Friday is that so many people talk about the Good Friday service as one of the most looked forward to services in the entire church year. People like Good Friday worship services. And that's always been a bit strange or hard for me to understand, because I think of Good Friday services as pretty somber, as pretty heavy, as pretty sorrowful. Not the kind of thing that I would think that someone would look forward to attending. And yet the more I've reflected on the attraction of the Good Friday service, I think I've found the answer to its appeal. I think the reason many of us look forward to Good Friday and actually enjoy the Good Friday service is because there's something in us that resonates deeply with what Jesus experienced on that tragic day. We all experience so much death in the midst of life. And not just the death of people, but the death of lots more. The death of seasons of life, the death of relationships, the death of dreams, and yes, of course, the death of people. Jesus' suffering and death on Good Friday is something we can readily identify with. Jesus' suffering and death that we acknowledge on Good Friday, it gives a voice to our own experience of suffering and death. But it does something else. Jesus' suffering and death, it begins to give purpose and meaning to the suffering and death we experience. Jesus shows us that in God's economy and plan, there is meaning and purpose even in suffering and death. In fact, sometimes, maybe all the time, things have to die for new life to be found. In Jesus' death, we have a picture of purpose and meaning even in the midst of grief and loss. We identify with Jesus' death because somehow it gives voice to, it gives expression to, and begins to give meaning to our own experiences of suffering and death. Maybe you experienced some of what we're talking about as you worshiped on Good Friday. Well, after Good Friday, there's Holy Saturday, the day on which Jesus' body lies in the grave. And again, there's something deep inside of us that identifies and resonates with this experience. The time Jesus spends in the grave on Holy Saturday, it reminds us of those seasons of life where the old has died, but the new has not yet come. When we've lost something and are grieving something, but the new has yet to be found. We all so want Easter Sunday to follow Good Friday immediately, but it doesn't. There's a Saturday in between, a seemingly interminable stretch of time where what was good is gone, but nothing has arisen to take its place. Sometimes things have to die. Things have to end. And sometimes we've got to sit with the ending for a while. Sometimes we have to spend a day or 3 in the grave. Holy Saturday resonates with us because just as Jesus had to stay in the tomb for 3 days before new life could be experienced, sometimes we have to sit with our grief and loss for a season of time before new life is found. In fact, figuratively, time in the grave seems to be a necessary prerequisite to the experience of resurrection. Easter Sunday doesn't happen before Holy Saturday. And maybe that describes what you're experiencing in your life right now. A stretch of time, a season that feels like you're in the grave. But you know what? After the grave, after Holy Saturday, then there is resurrection. There is always resurrection. There is always new life. The miracle of Easter is found not only in the fact that humanity's sin and failure was dealt with and resolved by the sacrifice of Jesus, but it is also found in the assurance that just as things in life die, and just as there are stretches of life that feel like we are in the grave, so there is also always resurrection. There is always new life to be found. There is always a brighter day ahead. In our experience, we're constantly seeing things end, seeing things fade away, seeing things die. Again, this could describe a relationship, it could describe a career, it could describe a season of life, it could describe a dream or a plan that we had for our lives, or it certainly could describe the loss of a person who dies, who is close and near to us. And following the death or the ending of any of these things, what we frequently feel, what we frequently experience is life in the grave. The old is gone, and we languish because we don't know what is yet to come. Those seasons are those stretches where something has died, something has ended, something has passed away, and nothing new has come. Those seasons, those stretches, those can be some of the most debilitating, discouraging, depressing times of our lives. But Easter reminds us that this is not where life stays. It is not where our story ends. We don't remain forever in the grave. Jesus' resurrection is the assurance that God always brings new life. There's something more that always follows endings or deaths. In fact, endings and deaths make way for new life to occur. Resurrection always happens. Did a dream die? God has a new dream ahead for you. Did a relationship end? God has a new relationship ahead for you. Did a season of life come to an end? There's a new season ahead. Did a career die or life plan get derailed? God has a new plan ahead. Did a friend or a loved one die? God has a new life for them. Are you dying? We all are. God has a new and better life ahead. There is always something new. There's always something more. New life is always ahead. Resurrection always happens. This is what Easter confirms and affirms for us. And here's the amazing thing. That new life, that resurrection experience that we're talking about, it is not conditional. It's not something we earn or merit. God doesn't just bring new life to a select few who seem to be worthy of it. Whether you've devoted your entire life to a deep and serious pursuit of God, or whether this is the first church service you've ever been part of, God is bringing new life for you and to you, for everyone. This is the meaning of grace. This is the meaning of the gospel. This is the message of "For God so loved the world." God brings new life to all. God is always bringing resurrection. He's always bringing something new from what has passed or ended. There's always something new and better ahead. So why don't we feel that way? Why don't we seem to experience that? Why is it so hard for us to live with that hope? Well, maybe it's because we don't see it. Here's the thing. You cannot experience what you do not see. You cannot experience what you do not see. Consider this story. It comes to us from the Gospel of Luke, and it's about two followers of Jesus on the road to a town called Emmaus. And it's recorded for us in Luke's Gospel, the 24th chapter. Here's how the story goes. It's the day of the resurrection. It's Sunday. It's the first Easter. And two of the followers of Jesus who have witnessed the events of the last 3 days are leaving Jerusalem. They're headed again to a village called Emmaus, which was northwest of the city of Jerusalem. They're defeated. They're broken. They're grieving. They've experienced great loss. As they travel along the road, a stranger shows up and begins to walk along with them. And we learn from the story that the stranger is actually the resurrected Jesus. But the two followers of Jesus, the two disciples, they don't recognize him as such. Now, as they walk along, they lament to this stranger about the tragedy that has just occurred. They talk to this stranger about the death of their friend, about the loss of Jesus, and about the death or the end of their hopes and their dreams. At one point in the story, they even remark to the stranger that some people have reported to them that Jesus has risen from the dead. But they don't believe it. They seem unconvinced. They talk openly to Jesus, the stranger, about the dilemma they're in. A death has occurred, but there is no sign of resurrection or new life. The story is a comedy, isn't it? It's a divine comedy. As these two followers of Jesus share their disillusion and disbelief with the resurrected Jesus. Now, later that evening, as the two disciples and the stranger sit down to eat, the text tells us that they recognized Jesus as they ate. Specifically, it says they recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread. The breaking of the bread. Now, here's the key to making sense of this story. By the time the Gospels are written, by the time this story is recorded, it's been decades since the death and resurrection of Jesus. Now, during that time between Jesus' death and resurrection and the recording or writing of this story, the followers of Jesus have had time to reflect on some of the things that they witnessed and experienced in greater depth and greater length. We also know that by the time this story is recorded, standardized Christian spiritual practices and traditions are beginning to emerge. And one of those traditions or practices is the regular breaking of bread, or the celebration of what we would call the Lord's Supper or communion or the Eucharist or the Mass. When Luke tells us that the followers of Jesus recognize Jesus in the breaking of the bread, he is making a statement about the role of spiritual practices and traditions. That's so important. Let me say that again. When Luke tells us that they recognize Jesus in the breaking of the bread, he's making a statement about the role of spiritual practices and traditions. He's telling us that through the practice of a spiritual tradition, the eyes of the disciples were opened to see the resurrected Jesus, to see new life. Until they engaged in that practice, they could not see the new life that was standing in their midst. Wow. That's something to think about, isn't it? Note in the story, the practice does not produce new life. The new life, the resurrected Jesus, is already there. He is already present. The practice enables the disciples to see the new life, to see the resurrected Jesus. Maybe we don't see the new life, experience the new life that is all around us, because we don't engage in the practices that help us or enable us to see. Easter assures us that God is always bringing new life from death. God is always bringing resurrection in the midst of death and endings and loss. And He's doing that for all of us. That's again what this celebration of Easter is all about. The question is, do we have the eyes to see the new life that God is creating? Can we see what God is doing so that by seeing we're able to participate in it? Again, we can't participate in what we don't recognize or see. As a church, one of the reasons we exist is to provide spiritual practices and traditions for all of us to engage in, not as a way of trying to get God to act on our behalf or earn new life, but as a way of training our eyes to see the new life that God is continuously bringing about. And God, again, is always bringing about new life. The best is always ahead. Are you training your eyes to see it? Easter, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, they provide a paradigm of life for us. They reveal to us a pattern by which life in God's plan or God's economy works. Yes, there is suffering and death. Yes, things end, be it seasons or dreams or relationships or people's lives. And death is always painful. Loss always hurts. And the death, the loss of anyone or anything, it always leads to a season or stretch of time that feels like life in the grave. But Easter reminds us that God always, always, always brings new life. There is always resurrection. Are you training your eyes to see it? I hope this Easter both challenges and encourages us. If we're in a season of mourning or grief, a season of defeat and discouragement, may we be encouraged that there is new life ahead. The grave is not forever. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. And may we be challenged today to engage in the resources the church offers us, to develop our spiritual eyesight so that we might see the new work that God is bringing about. There really is nothing in life more important than developing our spiritual seeing. And may we know that as surely as death and the grave are realities in our lives, so also is resurrection. God is always bringing forth new life in heaven's time and in heaven's way. May we have the eyes to see this new life. Happy Easter, everyone.